As many of you know, we extended an invitation to Congressman Derek Van Orden. Unfortunately, he declined to participate. Just over a week ago, Congressman Van Orden joined his Republican colleagues in passing legislation that makes devastating cuts to SNAP, Medicaid, and other critical programs that millions of Americans, including children, veterans, and seniors, depend on for food assistance, health care, and other basic necessities. Shame indeed. These cuts help fund additional tax breaks for billionaires and large corporations.
Well, of course they need that.
In Congressman Van Orden's absence, Wisconsin Congressman Mark Pocan has graciously agreed to step in today. He has represented Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District since 2013 and has been a steadfast champion for working families throughout our state. Here's how today will work. So, after hearing an update from state representatives Jody Emerson, Christian Phelps, Jeff Smith, Mark Pocan will provide a brief update, and then he'll take your questions. A lot of you already wrote your questions. And so, after he goes through the ones that you have written down, we will call on folks directly, and we'll help bring the mics out to you guys so that you can ask a question. Just some rules, right? We want to keep our discussion respectful and focused on policy matters, not electoral matters, so there's a good distinction there for you guys to remember. Congressman Pocan is here in his official capacity to discuss how recent congressional actions affect Wisconsin families and what we want to see from our representatives moving forward. So, with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest for this morning's discussion. Please join me in welcoming Representative Jody Emerson.
Good morning, everyone. How are you doing today? Good. Well, thanks for coming out on a beautiful Saturday, one of our first Saturdays in the summer, or what I think we're going to be known as Canadian wildfire season from here on out, unfortunately. I'm really excited that Mark is here to give us an update because, as you all know, we are not hearing from our congressman, not nearly as much as we should. I did see an interview recently that he did with one of our local TV stations. And yeah, a couple other people have seen it too. So I just want to get this out of the way because he said that people who showed up at Republican town halls were a cabal of left-wing rabble-rousers funded by George Soros. So please raise your hand if you have gotten your check today from George Soros. Okay, no hands went up. That's what I thought. I think Congressman Van Orden is a little confused because, I've been in office, this is my 4th term. It's my job to come back from Madison and tell you all what is going on, to solicit your input so I can make the best choices for our district as possible. Congressman Van Orden has a responsibility to come here to listen to his constituents, not filtered through the lens of his staff on a Zoom. He needs to see us face to face, and he's not doing that. And he needs to answer to his constituents. We are his bosses. We are the ones that he's supposed to be representing. And he can't do that unless he sees what we're doing, or what we're talking about. So I'm incredibly grateful that Mark is here to give us an update on what is happening in Washington. We're seeing some really, really fast things moving in Washington at the state level. We're trying to build the state budget right now, which is almost impossible when we don't know exactly what's going to be happening in DC. We don't know the level that we need at Medicaid and at other programs when we don't know what they're going to be sending us from Washington. So I'm so thankful for Congressman Pocan and his leadership and his willingness to come outside of his district and talk to those of us who want to know what's happening. But to also introduce one of our new colleagues in Madison, my friend, Representative Christian Phelps. He's going to give us a little bit of an update on what is happening in Madison. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for raising your voice and reminding those in Washington that they do work for us and they need to be working for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to see everybody this morning. Thanks for being here, and I think you're probably here because you have a lot of the same questions that we all have. As a new state representative in Madison, I was elected last November largely because I was talking to people here in Eau Claire and around the Chippewa Valley about how important it was that we get the next state budget right. I come from the public education world, and I know that public schools in Wisconsin have been starved for over 15 years of the resources that they need to provide a quality education to kids in the Chippewa Valley. And I talked a lot about how we need to invest as quickly as possible and right some of the policy wrongs that we've seen and get the budget in 2025 right. And then, right after getting inaugurated and taking office, Donald Trump was inaugurated and issued a series of executive orders claiming that he could cut off all the funding to Wisconsin. So suddenly, the job wasn't writing a good state budget and enacting good policy, it was fielding phone calls from people here in the Chippewa Valley saying, what do we do when all of our funding goes away? And the toughest thing was twofold. One, we tried everything we can, we still are. We wrote a bill called the Frozen Federal Funds Emergency Act. This week I wrote a bill saying we need to keep the caps on our private school voucher program so our state budget stays under control. Thank you. But the majority in Madison looks a lot like the majority in Washington, and they haven't even let those bills get hearings, much less move forward and get passed into law. And secondly, as the state budget takes shape, as Jody mentioned, it's my first budget process on the inside, and the Joint Finance Committee is already way behind schedule because we don't know whether we're getting $28 billion from the federal government like we did in the last biennium, or $0. And how do you craft a budget under those circumstances? So I'm really disappointed that when we get these questions and concerns and sometimes panic from constituents, we haven't been able to rely on our federal representative, who has once again declined his invitation to be here and explain to us what we can expect from the federal government. But it makes me even more grateful for Congressman Pocan for coming all the way to Eau Claire to help us navigate those tricky waters. So hope that some of your questions will be answered today, hope that some of ours will be answered today. And before we get to Mark, I'd like to invite Senator Smith to give us his take as well. So thank you, everybody.
You're going to hear a lot from Mark that you don't need to hear more from the rest of us, really. But first of all, I want you to know that Mark and I served together in the state legislature and got to know each other a long time ago. And we all know that Mark is a whiz at coining terms. I was just mentioning to Mark, I remember when he coined Fitzwalkerstan. And now we're living the broader national effects of authoritarianism. As you know, who would have thought? I just want to mention about the direction we're going as a little bit in the state of Wisconsin. What we're hearing, and as you just heard, all of our offices are hearing from constituents with real concerns, real worries. How is this going to affect us? And I want to give just an example I keep giving in Medicaid. When the cuts come, we have about 55% of persons in long-term care facilities who are there under Medicaid. When they lose funding, even if it's a portion of them, we're going to lose, or many of those places are going to close. Now, the 45 to 50% of people who are not using Medicaid that are there, they're going to lose that facility just as much as the person who's using Medicaid. And I think that really needs to sink in, how everyone is going to be affected by these awful cuts that are being proposed. Everyone. Everyone here and everyone around us. And it's a scary time, I know, but I want you to feel the optimism that I feel in the state of Wisconsin. After April 1st, when we lifted this whole country up with an election where we proved that we were not going to let a billionaire buy our Supreme Court, better about the opportunities that are in front of us. But this has just shined a light on our system that needs fixing. So I want to introduce our Congressman, Mark Pocan, because he's our Congressman as well, because we don't have good representation. Thank you, Mark, for being here.
Thank you. Let's hear it again for your state legislative delegation. I'm going to move Derek's chair up a little bit. Derek, one last time. Is Derek here? No? Okay. You were tweeting this morning, Derek. I thought maybe on the ride up you might have been doing a little tweeting. But so I want to do a couple of things. First of all, your legislative delegation is going to be really important in this fight as well, not just with the state budget and all the work they're doing, but with the Medicaid cuts, with the food assistance cuts, with cuts to education. There's going to be a huge impact on state government. And having Jody Emerson in the leadership of the Democratic caucus doing what she's doing is going to be vital. Having Christian Phelps, who is one of the newest members, but that new class is the biggest class I think may have ever come into the Democratic caucus, and he's helping lead that class in addressing these cuts initiatives. And Jeff and I served, you've got such a seasoned veteran here in the state Senate. That's going to be very, very important, especially as the state budget unfolds, because we finally yesterday got Trump's full budget. Up to that point we had the skinny budget, and we're starting to look at it, but it's as bad as you might imagine. But what I wanted to talk about today before we open up the questions, I want to talk about this big, beautiful bill for billionaires, because that's the only people ultimately that really benefit from this bill. I want to talk just a little bit about tariffs, and then I want to talk a little bit about the rule of law, because there is some good news there as well, while we're having, I think, a lot of bad news from the federal government, and it's really important to mention that. But at minimum, my job as a member of Congress, just like a legislator, is to take your values, people from Wisconsin's values, to Washington, and then try to explain Washington when I come back to Wisconsin. And that can be the tougher part of the job. Derek Van Orden gets a 0. He has never done an open public town hall since he's been in office. 2.5 years. That's the minimum requirement. If you can't show up, I don't know what you're doing. He voted for this bill. And every cut that I mentioned is something that is a badge on Derek Van Orden. When he's cutting 14 million people from health care, when he's raising the premiums for millions on the Affordable Care Act, that's a badge that he's going to have to wear. When he's cutting food assistance from 11 million people, the #1 program that keeps kids out of poverty in this country, that he said he would never vote to cut because he benefited from growing up. I think this is his 3rd time, by the way, voting to cut the program. Cuts to education, all of that is in this bill. And there's even some extra surprises that I'm going to share with you that I think if people really knew what was in this bill, I don't know how the Republicans could have voted for it. So let me start right off the bat. This bill is a huge debt buster. It is estimated by the Congressional Budget Office. And by the way, the Congressional Budget Office is the official nonpartisan agency that gives us, kind of like the State Fiscal Bureau, right? It's a nonpartisan agency, gives us the numbers. But guess what? The people who run it have been appointed by Republicans in Congress because they were the majority at the time they're there, and now they're trying to say, oh, the CBO has awful numbers. No, the reason they think they have awful numbers is because they don't like the numbers. The numbers are real. This is going to add $5 trillion to the national debt. So for all the fiscal responsibility conversations we hear from Republicans, not even close. The tax cuts, let's start with that. They're extending the Trump tax cuts from 2017 forward. There was an estimate, and again, some of this is still in flux because we did this all-night sessions, marking the bill up and voting on it. We're still finding out some of the aspects. But we were told originally if you had extended the Trump tax cuts for 10 additional years, which is what they're proposing, that would, 83% of the benefit goes to the top 1% of people. So they are literally taking from the pockets of pretty much everyone in this room and putting it into the pockets of Elon Musk and Donald Trump and others. This just shows the 2017 tax cuts, if you extend it forward, and it shows the amount on the far side. But I want to contrast it with, they said, well, if you don't vote for this, you're voting against a tax on tips, or you're voting for tips to be taxed, or overtime to be taxed, etc. Because they had these other benefits. I want to show these to you. This line right here is no tax on tips. No tax on tips. By the way, 1/3 of people who earn their income from a tipped job don't make enough to pay federal taxes anyway. And 5% of all low and medium wage workers are tipped workers. So you're not really helping lower income folks, but that little tiny line is that. The next one is the no tax on car loan interest. I'm sure Elon Musk had nothing to do with that provision. The next one is a senior tax deduction. They have a little amount. They were trying to do no tax on Social Security. He couldn't figure out how to do it. That's that. No tax on overtime. By the way, you still pay, along with tips, your FICA. You're still paying a tax, just not your federal income tax. Those three lines together, out of the totality of the bill, are 5% of the bill. So they're literally saying, for these crumbs, you have to give us the cake. Yeah. If you don't vote for it, somehow you're not supporting that. But this graph, I think, speaks volumes in where their priorities are. We're the people over here, and Donald Trump and Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and all the rest are over here. So that's the tax cut portion of this bill. In total, it's about 5.1% is one of the estimates of what it is for the overall bill. So what do you pay for those tax cuts? Well, first of all, you're going to pay in health care. The single largest cut to health care in American history is in this bill. 13.7 million people is estimated will lose access to health care because of the cuts to Medicaid. But what doesn't get as much coverage is they also cut some of the premium assistance for the Affordable Care Act. So it's a $700 billion cut to Medicaid, but also a $300 billion cut to the Affordable Care Act. And there, we don't even have the estimates of the numbers yet, but millions more will pay increased premiums. There is one estimate for in my district. If you're a couple, 60 years old, making $85,000 a year, it is estimated your health insurance increase that year would be $16,418 extra. A 227 increase in premiums if you're on the Affordable Care Act. So that's part of the hidden other things that are in this bill that Derek Van Orden supported. They have a bunch of red tape now. They said this is about work requirements. You should have to work. 2/3 of the people who get Medicaid are working poor. They're already working. But these extra requirements that they're doing, they know what it is. It's not about trying to have any accountability. It's to just make it harder for people to get health care. In Arkansas, they implemented many of these already, and 70% of the people who lost coverage after work requirements were instituted were actually eligible for care, but it was too difficult to be able to get that care. And this is the same thing they're doing in the bill before us. In addition, and this is something that they could have fixed, and they didn't. It shows you the values. Because of the amount of increase to the debt they did versus the amount of cuts, we have something called a pay-go rule. I won't go deep into the weeds, I promise, on this, but it impacts something called sequestration, where you have automatic cuts that were put in place by a previous law. If you did this, if you didn't balance out the budget, it will require a $500 billion cut to Medicare. Now, how many times have you heard people like Derek Van Orden and Ron Johnson say that they would never vote to cut, well, maybe not Ron Johnson, he probably would vote to cut Medicare, but others, that they would never cut Medicare? A $500 billion cut to Medicare. We don't know how that'll be impacted because they didn't lay it out, but it's the trigger. But they could have fixed it in the bill, and they chose not to. So that's another part of the health care cut that's there. What else did they do in healthcare? This is probably one of the biggest areas of cuts in general. They made it so that you have to recertify every 6 months, a bunch of other things that make it again burdensome, that people won't get their healthcare even if they truly are eligible. They defund Planned Parenthood. They effectively ban every Affordable Care Act insurance plan from covering abortion. They ban gender-affirming care for all individuals on Medicaid and the ACA exchange plans. And then just for giggles, I guess is the best word I can say, because it doesn't have a financial impact for the bill, they rescind protections for nursing home residents that ensure adequate staffing.
What?
Now,
To kill us.
yeah, just they throw it in because it's for the big nursing. Don't forget, nursing homes are largely getting bought out by hedge funds.
Yep.
Hedge fund managers are very rich people that benefit from tax cuts. Those same people are the ones who fund Republican campaigns, right? There's not a lot of dots to connect when you see this. But as Jeff told you, 55% of people in Wisconsin, if you're in a nursing home like my mom in her final years, got help from Medicaid. 45% of adults living with disabilities in Wisconsin who live independently get their help from Medicaid. 1 out of 3 kids in Wisconsin gets their health insurance through Medicaid. So the fact that that cut was $700 billion and we're going to have 14 million people almost lose access to that, it's going to put pressure on the state as well, because our healthcare plans that the state offers are part and parcel to the Medicaid plans, and it's going to have a real devastating impact. And in the 3rd Congressional District, it's estimated that total number of people losing insurance will be 28,953 people. So almost 30,000 people. Think about that. I mean, outside of Eau Claire and La Crosse and maybe Point, I don't think there's a community that's even 30,000 people in the entire district, and that's the number of people who will lose access. Let me just quickly move to nutrition. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is the #1 program that helps keep kids out of poverty. This is the largest cut to food assistance in American history. This is a program where the average benefit for a day is about $6.20. So it's a really small amount of money we're talking about to just help keep kids out of poverty and others out of poverty. This program is one where Derek made a comment that I don't know if anyone understands, including Derek, that he fixed something in this bill. And when I look at the fix, it reminds me of when you fix your dog and it doesn't work the same. I think his fix might have done that to SNAP. So right now, it's a shared amount of cost between the state and the federal government on the administrative cost of the program. They're now pushing 75% to the state, 25% federal. But we have one of the lowest error rates in the country. Why? Because we're Wisconsin, right? We do things really, really well. Governor Evers has run a very effective program. But because of the fix, whatever it is that Derek did, under the new formula, it was going to be originally every state had to pay for at least 5% of the food costs. But if your error rate is over, I think it's 5%, you get triggered to a 15% amount you have to pay as the state, which is millions and millions of dollars, and I'll share that in a minute. But they did something to force every state into this category. It used to be up to $54 you could have as an error rate, and I won't get lost in the numbers and details. The simple message is they just brought it down to $0. So if there's even a penny error, which trust me, in everything there is error, that will trigger your percent higher, which means Wisconsin at minimum will have to do, to continue food assistance, a 15% share. That means to the state somewhere between $120 to $258 million a year just so that kids can get access. I wish I could say that was the worst of it, but there's more. It used to be you have work requirements, right? Right now, able-bodied adults without dependents, if you're between 16 and 59, you're required to work at least 20 hours a week to be eligible. This bill changes that now to 64 years old. So some of our older folks that are getting assistance now have to work up to 64. But here's the one that I really don't get for this century, and maybe not the last. It used to be that if you had kids up to 18, that you wouldn't have the work requirements. Now it's been brought down to the age of any children over 7. So if you have an 8-year-old kid, they should be independent enough that they can work in the mines, darn it. They should be able to get their own food. So you now have to have work requirements on the single parent who has a child if they're over 7 years old. Again, just part of the punitive nature of what they did. The last thing I think I'm going to mention on the cuts very quickly in this bill, because there's so much. My summary is 40 pages. I think the bill was 1,400 pages, just to give you an idea. Our cuts to education. I know Christian's got the UW-Eau Claire campus in his district. Pell Grants. Pell Grants help lower income folks who are smart enough and capable enough to be able to go to college. I grew up in a lower middle class family. I got Pell Grants. That's how I got to college. They're going to cut that greatly, $330 billion. 4.4 million people will be impacted by the cuts. They're also changing the amount down by $1,000 that you're going to get. So now people are getting less money as education is getting more expensive. But they did find $20 billion extra over the next 4 years for a school choice tax credit program to help on the nationwide voucher program. So again, the very thing that the legislature here is trying to fight back against, they are going to put more money into that. And by the way, I had the Secretary of Education before my subcommittee on appropriations. 3/4 of the people who get benefits from Wisconsin and other states' voucher program already attended those schools when they got that. So it's not about education, it's simply about a tax credit. And so that should be tax policy, not education. What do they add money to? 2 areas. Defense. We had a budget of about $850 or so billion annually. They added $150 billion extra because Trump now has I think it's what you call it, a golden dome proposal. So that's adding a lot. But this is not money that's going to our troops to help them. This is going to the contractors largely, if you look at all the breakout of it. And then they do add about 70, I think, or so $billion to Homeland Security for work that Trump is doing around the border. That's this big, beautiful bill for billionaires, because that's the folks who benefit, but we all wind up paying. 14 million people lose health care, 11 million people lose food assistance, millions more pay more for health insurance, and then the ripple effects that are going to affect state government and others and local government as well, because it is just the ripple effects that people are going to feel. So that's the big, beautiful bill. Next, let me talk real quickly about tariffs. I want to make sure we get to your questions. Look, I think if anyone in this room could honestly tell me where exactly we are with tariffs, I've got $20 in my pocket. I myself am not eligible for the $20 because I couldn't tell you. Donald Trump's tariff policy reminds me of when you go to the zoo and there's a monkey and the monkey is throwing its dung. You don't know where it's going to hit, but you know it's going to be messy. That's kind of Donald Trump's tariff policy, right? There is no real formula that we're following. The numbers just get thrown out there. And worse yet, they're on again, off again. It is impossible to follow, which is really affecting small businesses. I've been a small business owner for 37 years. I had one vendor who then passed on an increase due to the China tariffs. And I noticed there also was an increase on American-made walnut items. They're completely American-made walnut, and they still pass it on, because that's what happens, right? Other things are going to be. So we're starting to see this. Not only did Donald Trump not reduce costs like he promised in November, but the tariffs are actually a tax on all of us. And I had a conversation again in my subcommittee on appropriations with the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary Pocan, who is a smart man but plays dumb to be in the Trump administration. And I asked him who pays for tariffs, and he said, and I said, no, who pays for tariffs? He finally said, well, that's a complicated question. No, it's not. The importer pays the tariff, but they pass it on to the consumer. We pay tariffs. Now, you can have targeted tariffs and use them well. If they're dumping cheap steel in the United States, we absolutely should do a targeted tariff on steel and protect the industry here, the workers here, and the ripple effects for autos and others. But when you indiscriminately throw them everywhere, and then a company can't plan, and they don't know, we're hearing all kinds of complaints from that. I have a company in my district that makes a significant medical device, 70% sourced in America, 48% sourced in Wisconsin. But half of the market he has is in China. Because most other countries already had this, so he only was replacing the machine. They're still buying the machines, but because of the tariffs, he's in a huge bind. And this is just repeated by farmers I talked to in the district who have commodity issues, or even we had a farmer outside Ellsworth who was at a Chippewa Falls town hall that Farmers Union did a number of months ago, and I was up for that, who said his milk bottles, the raw product comes from the US, the bottles came from Canada. They get taxed going, a tariff tax, a reciprocal one from Canada, going to Canada, they get taxed, tariff tax coming back here, and that $3 bottle is now $5 or $6. So we're all paying those tariffs. I know two things about tariffs. One, Donald Trump does believe in tariffs. Number two, he's counting on a lot of the revenue from the tariffs to pay for the tax cuts. So it's funny money, right? I know you're shocked. Donald Trump maybe not being totally upfront and honest with us, but I do think once the tax bill is over in whatever form it winds up, I think you may see a little less intensity around tariffs because that artificial revenue wasn't needed. Don't forget, last time he did the tax bill, everything was thrown on the debt. So this time, they're trying to cut a certain amount. They have a certain amount of revenue through tariffs, and then they're still putting $5 trillion on the national debt. Third and final thing, I want to give you something more uplifting because I know I've had a lot of bad news so far. Donald Trump loves to flood the zone, right? He likes to, there's so many things he's doing, so many lures that we could go for. What I learned was when Donald Trump was president last time, 10% of what he said actually happened. This time, I think it's probably 25%. But the art is figuring out what the 25% is. Will we invade Greenland? I don't think so. Will Canada become the 51st state? I would not put money on that. But there are many other things that we've got to figure out what he's doing. He's been pushing the law and the Constitution with many of his decisions. The funds that are frozen and unfrozen. Look, it's Congress. Article 1 of the Constitution gives us the power of the purse. If Derek were here, I would share that with him. I believe, though, he's probably on X right now sharing his opinions to the rest of the world. But this is one of the things that people are the most concerned about when we get calls. I mean, Medicaid by far has been the biggest concern that we hear from people. But they're just worried about what's going to happen, to the country. What happens when he pushes it too far? Is there going to be a constitutional crisis? Let me say this. This is the good news. And I talked to Josh Kaul, our Attorney General, who's been a part of many of these lawsuits and really deserves a lot of credit, because he and other Democratic Attorney Generals are fighting on our behalf on a real regular basis to put many of these lawsuits up there. But the Trump administration largely caves in almost every case. Out of over 200 lawsuits, we've already had 100 positive adjudications on our behalf, and Donald Trump caves. So now there's this new, absolutely. And now there's this new taco reference, right? Trump always chickens out. You could also say Trump always caves out or whatever, but it's this is what he does, right? So that is the good news. The rule of law is holding. Our founding fathers did a really great job when they put our country together, and all the caretakers up to this point have put us in a place where even Trump-appointed judges are making the right decision, because the rule of law is the foundation of this country. It's not Donald Trump, it's no individual, we're not a monarchy, there are no kings, but we do have the rule of law at the foundation of everything we do. So that is holding. And that is really, I think, positive news that we need to share with folks. So I'm going to stop there because I just wanted, it's a lot of information, but this bill is the holy grail for Donald Trump. This tax cut bill for the Republicans, this is how they take care of their donor base. This is how they take care of many of the Republican base. This is what Elon Musk wants. This is their holy grail. Every day I go to work, and unfortunately, I think the legislators would share this feeling. I get bad choices and worse choices. I'm all for bad choices. So if I can get the bad choice of stopping some of the cuts to healthcare and food assistance and education cuts, that may be the best that we get out of this. I think they will have the votes for their tax cut bill at the end of the day, but they shouldn't do it on our backs. They shouldn't be stealing from the middle class and those aspiring to be in the middle class in order to get it done. So that's where you reaching out to your member of the House, our 2 senators, is really important. We all look at those numbers. We look every week. I know exactly who's reaching out to me as far as by numbers, the top 10 issues that come in via email, via phone calls, via letters, and we really do keep track of that. So it's important that you do that outreach and hold your members of the House and Senate accountable. I mean, if they're not talking to you, that's the bare minimum of their job. So instead, if they want to go meet with a chamber, you know what? Show up and make that a town hall, right? We need to do more to make them accountable, because I think the best reason why I do this, why I come around and do town halls in Republican districts, instead of fighting about, is this cut this amount or this amount, where's the decimal point, all of that, it's Wisconsin common sense. Does it pass the smell test, right? If they're afraid to talk about this big, beautiful bill, that doesn't pass the smell test, right? Wouldn't you want to brag about it? You go to every county in your district and say, look what I'm doing for you. This is the bill for you. But they're not doing that. Their leadership is telling them, don't do town halls. Like, how much more do we have to realize that there's so much BS in this bill, and they know it, and they're afraid to talk about it? So going into districts, and I started this a while ago. We got now 20 or 30 members doing this around the country. I think that's growing, and we're going to keep doing this. But it's one, to make sure you're heard, so that's what we're going to do now. We're going to open it up for questions. But two, to make sure that we have that accountability for people who vote for things like this. Because up to this point, we've got a lot of lip service. I mean, Derek Van said you never vote against SNAP. You wouldn't cut Medicaid, right? You'd only go after fraud and abuse. Look, an 8-year-old kid is not a fraudster or creating any abuse. And taking food from an 8-year-old is really about as bad as you can get, right? So we need to hold them accountable. So let's open it up for questions. I know they've got some mics they're going to bring around and try to answer anything. Oh, you have some written down too, don't you?
Yeah, I've got a whole bunch right
Let's do that, if that's all right. This is how we've kind of been doing it, because I think it helps to know where the volume is and stuff. Okay, topic in the upper corner. So let me just read through, and they're in order. So if we don't get to it, we'll open it up. Medicaid, you're asking about Medicaid. I don't understand why Congressman doesn't acknowledge their vote on the big, beautiful bill. What is your take on this? Well, the reason they don't acknowledge their vote is because they know it's an awful vote, right? I mean, to take away health care from that many people. And it's not about people who are, waste, fraud, and abuse. They love to talk about that. By the way, DOGE has been the biggest waste, fraud, and abuse that we have seen in federal government in a long time. All it was a venue for Elon Musk to go around, turn on and off federal spigots, and guess what? While that kid is getting $6.20 a day in food assistance, he gets $8 million a day in federal contracts with the federal government. So what he wants to do is he just wants to be able to, he now knows more areas he can make money. And when he fired all these people, guess what his answer is? He thinks AI should pick up on this. Guess who has an AI company? I know you're going to be shocked. Elon Musk, right? So I introduced a bill when he was still around a little more. Now they put him in the back closet. He's still in the room. He's just in the back closet because they realize he's volatile. But that was the Eliminate the Looting of Our Nation by Mitigating Unethical State Kleptocracy Act, which is also known as the Elon Musk Act, which said either he could do what he's doing in federal government but not get contracts, or he has to leave the federal government if he's going to keep doing it. Apparently the bill may not be directly necessary anymore because he's taking at least a step back, but I can tell you, as they were saying this last week in Washington, one day Secretary Duffy from Transportation was at his company. The next 2 days Elon Musk was in Washington. This is lip service. They just know how toxic he is. So he's still around, it's just they realize the toxicity. How do we plan to save Medicaid? That's the calls we've got to make right now, right, to folks. We've got to make sure that if we put enough pressure on members, and they realize this. Now the good news, another bit of maybe good news, I should say, is the Senate bill that they originally were talking about doing had 2% of the cuts of the House bill. So in general, the Republicans are a little more moderate, a little more adult-like in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate on this. However, our Senator Ron Johnson doesn't like the House bill because it doesn't cut enough. So he's a little bit of an outlier, which I know you'll be shocked by, but there is some promise that the Senate will do a bill with fewer cuts, and then they have to reconcile the two bills, and that's what will be moving forward. I've been a registered nurse for 48 years, thank you. Many of those clients I have rely on Medicaid or Medicare, and a lot live in nursing homes or assisted living. What will happen to them should this big bill pass? That's our problem with this, right? 55% of seniors. My mom was at the Dane County home, Badger Prairie, in her final years. A lot of folks are getting assistance at that point in their life from Medicaid. And these cuts, when we squeeze the state, that's why it's so important your state legislators are here. We can pass something down to them, and then they're feeling the squeeze. And then they might find a way to pass it on to local government a little bit. but there's nowhere else to pass it at that point, right? So there's going to be hurt parts of what's happening from the federal and state and local government level out of this. So we just have to keep reaching out. I'm a disability advocate for over 30 years. I'm quite distressed about the dismantling of ACL, the admin on community living. It was a creative streamline services to help people stay in the community. What can we do? You know, again, I think a lot of this is going to come back to the what can we do stuff, I think, over and over. We just have to be more vocal than ever. The good news, and Jeff Smith mentioned this, that election in April, the victory was not that a good judge is now going to the Supreme Court. And the message of that election was not that she won by 10 points statewide in a state where most people win by 1 point. The big message of that April election was the turnout. We knew from polling that we were up 5 points. I talked to a Republican member from Wisconsin. They knew Trump's pollster came in, they were down 5 to 6 points. Exact same polling. But we also knew that if we could get to the turnout level 2 years ago when Janet Protasiewicz won, which remember, there's more attention and more money because it was the flipping of the court at the time, right? All the attention was on that. If we could get to that level, we could maybe get to 10 points. But what actually happened is we surpassed and blew away that turnout, and we got to mid-level congressional election turnout for an April nonpartisan Supreme Court race. And that's because people felt like they're not heard. If you remember, Congress won't do town halls, how are you heard? How do you get that message across? And you did it by voting. And that was the message. So if I was anyone who won by less than 10 points in any office, legislative, state legislative, or congressional, I would either figure out a way to start listening to my constituents, or I would get a discount card from Costco and start buying Depends by the case, because you're going to be in trouble. And this is what we're seeing. Threats to judiciary. Explain the provision in the bill to give presidential complete control of the judiciary. It basically says that it stops, it allows the president to basically supersede any judicial actions. I think the chances are very low it's going to continue. One, it doesn't comply by the Senate rules, and I won't get into minutia, but the bird bath, they call it the bird rules, I don't think it'll be able to stay for that reason. Already, there was a Republican House member from Lincoln, Nebraska, did a town hall. Not many Republicans are doing town halls. I think there were 2 or 3 of them. And he said, I didn't know that was in the bill. He voted on something, he didn't even know what was there. So I think it's very unlikely that stays, but it does show you what he's doing, right? That's the reason they're prosecuting the Milwaukee judge and doing other things, is they're trying to scare the judiciary, because we're winning when it comes to the rule of law, and now that's their way of trying to thug their way around. UW system. What will you do to advocate for funding for the University of Wisconsin system? We're looking talk about losing ground compared to other states. So that's more of a state issue, state funding. But I can tell you, there are attacks on the universities from the federal government as well. I mean, this attack on Harvard is like unprecedented. Fortunately, they're fighting back, and I'm glad they're doing that. But the financial aid and other cuts that they're going to have, the research cuts, NIH dollars, by the way, every single drug, no, I take it back. I think it's all but 3 drugs out of like 10,000 in the last 15 or 20 years have come to market with help from NIH research, which is our tax dollars, and now they're cutting that. So we have researchers, especially at UW-Madison, where there's a lot of this money in cancer research and other areas, who are just stopping research midway. We've wasted the money that we've spent, and now a lot of scientists are talking about leaving the country to do research, leaving the field. This is one of our toughest areas. Social Security firings. My niece's husband worked for the Social Security Administration. On the day of his 20th anniversary, he received a termination letter from Musk. You know, the firings, again, are where many of the lawsuits are. That they don't have the power to do much of what they've done. But the problem with Doge was Elon Musk had no federal government experience. Most of the people he brought in had no federal government experience. It was largely a lot of younger folks, maybe in their 20s, that never worked in federal government. One guy went by the nickname Big Balls. So Big Balls is firing thousands of people. Doesn't exactly give me the confidence that I was hoping coming out of the Doge cuts. But when you cut thousands of people who work for Social Security, you make it harder for people to get access to their money. We've paid into Social Security all our life through our paychecks and our employers' paychecks, and they're firing folks. By the way, they fired so many people, they don't even know what they're doing when they're firing people. So they fired all the people who worked, or not all, but many of the people who worked on nuclear weapons, and then had to try to rehire them. They fired the people who worked on avian flu, bird flu, which was affecting us greatly recently, and they had to rehire them. At the Department of Health and Human Services, RFK's, where he's the secretary, RFK Jr., they fired 10,000 people, and now they're trying to hire 2,000 of them back. We know people who've been fired, rehired, fired again, and rehired again. But at what point do you stay working in these areas if that's how your employer treats you, right? So it's a real problem. DOGE has been an utter failure, an utter mess, and now people like Derek Van Orden tweeted out this week to his great pal, Marjorie Taylor Greene, that he's looking forward to working with her to now codify the cuts through law. Anyway. How can the president implement all these tariffs without approval from Congress? Isn't that in the Constitution? Yes. Someone else reads the Constitution. No, that's the powers of Congress, right, are around tariffs, and he has very, very limited power. So recently, an international court stopped his actions, an appellate court reversed that. So I think the real pressure is Trump will be a little more cognizant about the bond markets, and they're not reacting well. But it is hard. I've been a small business owner since I had hair, all right? It is hard when you don't know where your costs are any given day. How do you charge people? Do you stock up on something now? You know, everything is so difficult because of these tariffs, and we've seen the effect on the markets because of it, and it's really hard. Qatari jet. How can the president accept a $400 million jet when it's expressly forbidden in the Constitution? Look, this is part of Donald Trump, right? They put a little gold in it, so he saw the shiny object and he wanted it. Actually, I think he asked for it, is what originally happened, right? And it's going to cost so much more to get this done, but he wanted a more modern jet. Look, this is the problem. Elections have consequences. Donald Trump is the president. Right now they have a majority in the House and the Senate. Right now they have majorities in the legislature. Thankfully, we have a Democratic governor still here in Wisconsin that can at least stop things that the legislature does. But that's why we have to be very cognizant moving forward of who our elected officials are. How do we get the word out about all the hidden gems in their bill they just passed? Well, that's what we're doing right now, right? Hopefully we're getting around trying to talk about it, and more will come out of it. The Senate eventually, I think by July 4th, I'm guessing, they will vote on their bill. Originally, they wanted to have it all done by Memorial Day. Now they're saying they're going to have it all done by July 4th. I'm thinking they may get the Senate bill done by then, but then they're going to have to reconcile the bills. And so it's going to take a little while yet. That means we have time to still do pushback and help. What's important is you live in a district with a Republican member of Congress. Any 3 Republicans, that's all they have is a 3-seat majority right now. Unfortunately, due to some deaths, they really have a 4-seat majority right now. But any 4 people that say no can block something. So if Derek Van Orden wants to have, to show that he's listening to you, he can stand up and stop this and just find 3 of his friends. I mean, Marjorie, clearly, he's already tweeting at her, right? So they're BFFs. You can stop things. And if you won't, well, he doesn't have to be your representative either. Humanitarian aid cuts. I'm frankly ashamed of how the U.S. has abandoned its humanitarian role in the world and is shifting wealth upward at the expense of the less fortunate. Yeah, I mean, one of the first things they came after was USAID, right? And now it's essentially gone. A little bit of it is we put into state, but literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people have left. And I got a chance to watch it real closely because, in Madison, I used to be a big brother, and my little brother, we were matched at 8, now is in his 40s, and lives in D.C., he and his wife, and he worked for USAID, and his wife worked at the GAO, and he was helping electrify medical clinics in Africa, because we were doing good things with our resources, and that's part of important diplomacy and efforts that aren't just Department of Defense. You have to have diplomacy if you're going to get things done. And the devastation there is huge. But the devastation also is we sent many countries food, and guess where that food came from? Farmers from Wisconsin, right? And other parts of the country. So now our farmers are also getting hit on that. Their funds have been frozen on things like the Inflation Reduction Act, even though many of them took out loans and now they're not going to get the money. So that's putting them in a financial squeeze. The tariffs are putting them in a financial squeeze. Many of them are getting Medicaid. That farmer I was talking about with the milk bottles, he's also on Medicaid. That puts him in an additional squeeze. And at what point is that squeeze just too much? The parallels to today in 1933 Germany really alarms me. What is your alarm level? What can the average person do? Let me answer it slightly different rather than the comparison to 33. I just say, I think we're all pissed.
Yeah.
And we're all concerned, and we're all a little afraid. And I share each of those emotions with you. And depending on the day and the action, I'm not sure which emotion we're going through. But at the end of the day, we are right on all the issues, right? We can fight back. We do have a rule of law that's holding for us. And we just have to, unfortunately, take more time than ever to be heard and to be active, to fight back in that way, because that is what we have. But we do have the numbers on people. So support the groups that are doing litigation, because that is the single best way we're stopping Donald Trump right now. Help us with communication. It's not misinformation that's out there, it's disinformation that's being put out there. So fight back against that. So when Derek Van Orden recently got national attention for being one of the few Republicans still saying Democrats are lying, there are no cuts to Medicaid. Even other Republicans acknowledge there are cuts to Medicaid. Well, a letter to the editor saying, no, that's a lie. 13.7 million people, according to the Congressional Budget Office, that leadership was appointed by Republicans, are saying this. So either I won't say it. I think you get the idea, right? Either he may not be the sharpest crayon in the box, or he's trying to compete with Donald Trump in lying levels. I don't know which, but that's what we just need to be super, super active. Finally, what can us citizens do about the genocide in Gaza? Look, I know we didn't get a chance to talk about immigration issues very much, and maybe you'll have other questions we can try to answer. But this bill right now is the big thing that's moving, so the focus. But what's going on in Gaza right now? I don't even have words for, because what we're seeing is, I think, a complete decimation of Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu, and it is really Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, he's squeezing out any person that had more moderate or more temperate beliefs. And, we've seen so many people die unnecessarily, people starving right now because they're also blocking assistance. I've been to the region 3 times. Twice I was supposed to get into Gaza and was denied. So much that I finally, in the approach process, added a provision that any country that gets money has to allow access to the country. And I had given permission in September of 2023, right before October 7th, to go into the country. They had asked me to give them a 3-month window. And we looked at our congressional calendar and said between Halloween and the end of January was the best window I had. And then, of course, October 7th happened. So I think this is one where, support the humanitarian groups is really, really important. My husband and I each individually give money to UNRWA every month because they are one of the main groups that's been providing the food assistance and healthcare and education in the area. World Kitchen, other groups are doing some amazing work. So supporting those groups is really important. And then making sure you're heard. I mean, at this point, I can no longer, in good conscience, support arms sales to Israel. I just think with how they use their weapons is unconscionable. And as long as Benjamin Netanyahu is the person making those decisions, that's a problem. By the way, your member of Congress, Derek, has traveled to the region a few times. In fact, he missed votes one time doing that a couple years ago. But he's gone with a very extreme right-wing group that even some of my colleagues who I don't necessarily agree with on all the policy on this, even said that's a group that's such a fringe group that they would never travel with them. And your member has twice, I think, traveled at least with them to the region. So, all right, so let's open it up officially for mics. I got through those. Hopefully that helps, because sometimes people don't like to ask questions, but they want to be heard. Who's got the mics? So we got some folks here, and there's some folks over here.
Yeah. So
Can you hear me? Really quick, I just want to do section by section so that we're not favoring people. We're going to have people raise their hands, and Buddy and I will bring a mic to you. So, yeah, let's start with, we'll do section 1, 2, and 3. So we'll start with section 1 here. Yeah.
Thank you for making the trip to Eau Claire. We're, of course, we're a reddish-purple district, so virtually all of us have friends, family, neighbors who might have Republican preferences. What messages do you find most effective in teaching those friends, family, neighbors of the dangers of the current administration to their own pocketbook, to the state, to the country, to the world?
Sure. So most people, and this is not a Republican or Democrat, most things are self-motivated, right? What's going to affect them is the best way to address it. This bill is without question, in over 30 years of serving in local, state, and federal government, the worst bill I've ever seen introduced by anyone, by any political party. And I guarantee the bill's going to have to be downscaled because the Senate's not going to allow it to pass in that way. But the fact that they would vote for it, so for all the, everyone counts on their Medicare. $500 billion cut is going to affect them. Everyone knows someone who's on Medicaid. It's 1.3 million people in Wisconsin. There's going to be cuts to that. Food assistance. When you start saying they made it tougher that a mom with an 8-year-old is going to go have to work 20 hours a week to get $6.20 a day in assistance for her kid, I don't know many people who are as heartless as to think that that's a good idea. I would just really raise those issues. And then the fact that who benefits mostly from what Donald Trump is doing? Donald Trump, right? It's Donald Trump and Elon Musk. That's who's getting all the money. The amount of cuts to healthcare and food assistance. So I mentioned that's $1 trillion plus another, I don't know, 200 or 300 billion on that is equivalent to the tax cut for people who make more than $500,000 a year. So just think about that. I mean, if you're making more than $500,000 a year, congratulations, but the tax cut for those folks is equivalent to all the cuts for 14 million people on healthcare and 11 million people on food assistance. I think even someone who just thinks they're Republican because they grew up Republican would see that and see the inhumanity of those numbers and the fact that our pockets are being picked. Look at that. That's 5% of the total bill went. Oh, and by the way, they're all sunsetted. After a few years, they go away. The last Trump tax cut bill made corporate tax permanent. Now this Trump tax bill makes tax cuts for the richest permanent. And we're always the temporary crumbs on the plate. So I think we just need to really get that information out there.
Anybody from this middle section? I see. I want to start in the back if you don't mind. All right, we're going up here.
Well, you got
Oh.
it somehow.
Hi there.
So this is my first time coming to one of these.
Okay.
I'm a middle of the road person.
Mhm.
I'm sorry that-
I was kind of excited today because I wanted to hear what Van Orden was going to say, and I was really excited when I saw my other people in my district here. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to work together. And I was a little disappointed. I'm very disappointed he's not here because I did want to ask him questions, and I'm very happy you gave information today. But it seems like this room, no one's pro-Trump, which I get. I'm not either. Why didn't we run a better candidate? Why, how, like in your, that's the reason he's president. No one thinks he's a strong president. Why didn't we stop that from happening so we're not having these conversations?
Sure. So this is on the official side. So let me answer it in an official way rather than getting maybe more into detail. But I believe the reason Donald Trump was elected president in November was because of the cost of living. 50% of the people when they left exit polls said it was the economy. But a dozen countries around the world that are similar to us, the ruling party was kicked out because of inflation, the lingering effects of inflation. People are paying too much for housing, for food, and for energy costs. So that was the number one thing going for Donald Trump on November. But today it's the number one thing that's taking him down the polls because he said he'd address it. He's done nothing. In fact, he's made it worse through tariffs. But I really do believe, it was hard enough to switch a candidate out midterm and all the rest of the stuff that happened. But when you actually look at the data, people voted their pocketbooks. Again, people are looking out for themselves, as you would expect. And when you look at those other countries as well, I think that was what hit us the hardest. And could arguments be made that you could have messaged differently and all the rest? I believe so. But all those other countries, to see that pattern around the world, I think was significant.
I'm specifically asking about President Biden running when, like I said, I'm pretty moderate. For
Yeah.
3 years, you could tell there was 2 years, there was pretty big issues.
Yeah.
That's my,
No, I got you. I think no matter who was on the ballot running, could have very likely been the same situation. I mean, unfortunately, cost of living was, without question, the biggest issue. We saw it worldwide. Unfortunately, it was the inflation coming out of the country, all reopening at once post-COVID. There still were the lingering costs. You could always hypothesize, we messaged more on that and do some things differently, but at the end of the day, that was the number one headwind that we had was that.
Yeah, feel free.
Thank you for being here. Related to the bill, given that our current congressional district leader and one of the state senators is supporting this bill, our calls may not persuade a change in that area. So my question relates to, would it be effective to be calling the senators of other states, those that may be more amenable to change their vote or to have more impact on the details of the bill itself? Could that be, and would that be effective?
No, that's a great question, and I'll tell you, I would not call anyone that's not your rep because you probably won't get through. We got record calls this year. In my Madison office, we were up to 300 a day, set a new record. Then a couple weeks, we were at 500 a day. 1 week, we had to respond to 18,000 communications via email and other, with 2 people to do that in the office. So I can't reply to people outside the district because, first of all, it's hard to get through the system because we have to have something to kind of do that. So unfortunately, no. Helping organize people in those areas to maybe do things is certainly helpful. But you are unicorns. You are in one of the most competitive districts in the country, and the reason you're in one of the most competitive districts isn't just because it's a purple district, it's because you have one of the most extreme members of Congress. So you have a lot of power. And honestly, like I said, I guarantee every member of Congress is getting this report. And you see who calls on what issues. And if you start to see you have 2,000 people saying, don't cut Medicaid, and 10 saying cut it, because I don't think there's a lot of people saying cut Medicaid, what do you really do? It's a good pressure point. And then have accountability. Derek Van Orden should not be chicken. He's got to come and face you. Like, you're not scary, you seem very nice, right? Why would that be a problem to come and have a conversation? But he should have to justify why that mother with an 8-year-old now has to go work 20 hours a week because that kid's 8 years old, right? Like, I think those are the questions that you've got to be able to really push back, and he has to answer. And again, you have a very unique district for that reason. So don't worry about other folks. It's really hard to get through to them. But all the more reason, reach out to your member of Congress, reach out to your 2 senators. And I say 2 because honestly, like in my district, people who agree with me, I say still reach out to me because it lets me know what you're interested in, what you're most concerned. In the initial calls, people hated Elon Musk, number 1. And by the way, you really, really hate Elon Musk. And number 2, you didn't want Medicaid cut. So that helped us to know that people really receive it and count on it and are worried about Medicaid, right? So those they really matter, and don't feel like you're calling too often. And the other thing I would say is it's probably an intern answering the phone if they have someone. Some Republicans have just let it go to message. But be nice to the person answering the phone no matter what, because it's probably, someone who's going through college. This is something to see how they like federal government. We don't want to scare them far, far away. So, just keep that in mind.
All right, I'll take somebody from this half of the crowd. I want to be fair, so I apologize if I don't get to you, but yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Sure.
Question about redistricting in the state of Wisconsin, particularly with the House. My understanding there's 5 Republicans, 2 Democrats. Is there
6 Republicans, 2 Democrats in
Thank you.
Wisconsin.
Is there any movement right now to look at redistricting?
There is a lawsuit or 2 right now, I think, that in the last month have been introduced going after the fact that our state legislature fortunately finally has fair maps, and we should have fair maps, period, right? So there are some lawsuits introduced to address that. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not on the Supreme Court, and I'm not part of the suit, so I couldn't tell you much more than that, but common sense, if we're a purple state, if you have 8 members of the House, it should probably look more like 4 and 4, not 6 and 2. So we clearly have had gerrymandering from 2 cycles ago, kind of kept in place by the last redistricting when they said least change. So you did least change to really, really awful maps, and that's kind of why we have the maps we have now. So I just think I want fair maps everywhere, including at the federal level, and let's hope that that's maybe the success that the lawsuits will have. There's a gentleman right next to you there. There you go.
Several times you mentioned holding our representatives accountable. I don't see how that's going to work. I can't get the ambition to call Derek Van Worden's office. He is not going to do anything to help me. I can't get the ambition to call Ron Johnson's office. That call is going to be ignored completely. I can't get the ambition to communicate with Tammy Baldwin because I know she's going to do exactly what I want her to do. Please explain.
Well, you had the ambition on a Saturday morning that's really nice to come here. So I think you could probably work it up to make a call once a week to them. I mean, I really do think it matters to have the calls, but you also have the power to hire and fire people every 2 years in the House of Representatives. So, if he's not responding, then you have that power to take that action. But, yes, you do need to make the calls. Yes, you do need to be heard. And the only way we're going to win is to fight back. We need 4, unfortunately, because of deaths, 4 members across the entire country to stand up for any part of that bill and say they won't do it, and it doesn't happen. So either they're wholly responsible for everything, including $500 billion of cuts to Medicare, or not. So if those changes don't happen, that's the badge that he's going to have to wear, and then you can deal with that when you're deciding to rehire someone.
Okay, I see a bunch of hands over here.
There are a lot. Let me move the mics a little faster because there's a lot of folks here. Just kind of be ready for the next one. I think that'll save some time. And yeah, and I'll try to go quicker in answers. I apologize.
My question's kind of has to do with his. Is it possible or feasible to even do a recall for Senator Johnson or Van Orden?
I don't know.
Is it worth it?
Jeff and I are looking at each other. We've been through a few of those over time.
Does it work?
Honestly, I would just be active. If he is going to somewhere, if he's not going to do a town hall, and my guess is since he hasn't done one for 2.5 years, and by the way, the phone town halls he does are the most BS things. I've done a couple through COVID because we had to, but you answer whatever question you want to. You pick the people who are answering the questions, and they never pick a tough question. So, but they're spending your tax dollars to have those, but they're not real. So.
Well, I ask because I know Republicans that have regretted the way they voted.
Yeah.
So.
Well, usually they regret it when they hear from a bunch of people. Like that guy from Lincoln, he regrets that he didn't read the bill before he voted for it, I'm sure, right? Or didn't know what was in it. But they pushed it. We had overnight votes. I mean, we voted on it as the sun was coming up. literally after debate on it. And the Rules Committee did rules, all the amendments, overnight. Like, everything was done in the dark at night. That's not how you brag about a bill. You do it all at prime time if it's that good. So, I think just keep him accountable. And if he is coming to Eau Claire for anything, honestly, make it a town hall. He shouldn't be allowed to go meet with his friends or his financiers for the campaign without having to be accountable to all of you. So be outside. Invite the press to be outside. I'll bet they would love to see you have a conversation with Derek Van Orden, right? So just be there. And it is going to be a little more ambition, like the one gentleman said, but we're going to have to do that to really hold him accountable.
He calls that a threat.
That's not a threat. I mean, and by the way, we all get death threats. It's awful that he and his family got a death threat, but my office doesn't even tell me anymore because I get enough death threats on it. There are 4 Republican senators who were going to vote against some of the cabinet picks, and I was told this very good confidence from a long-serving Democratic senator. He was told that because of threats to their families is why they voted differently. I mean, this is an ugly time with how MAGA operates and things, but it's not a threat to ask your member of Congress to tell you why they're taking a vote. And just don't ever make threats, clearly. I mean, we don't, I don't think, but there's folks who do. And just do it respectfully in that way.
Hi, I'm just wondering about the Constitution and whether there's anything that we can do to maybe recall this president or impeach him, or is everything in the Constitution?
Well, if this Congress will not impeach him, I'll guarantee the Republic, they won't stand up to him. Again, Article 1 of the Constitution about power of the purse is Congress's tariffs, the power of Congress, and they're letting him do everything. So they will not stand up. However, should the majority change, we can have accountability. We'll have investigations. We'll have hearings into things he's doing, and you could have some accountability. And right now, there's even polling showing that the Senate could flip next year as well. So I just think we have to be real active in that way. And support other people, because so many people are hurting. I mean, this is a tough time. I've never had so many town halls where people, come up crying, worrying about someone, generally around Medicaid in particular. So just be supportive of the folks who you can, because it really means a lot.
Thank you for telling us about all of the stuff that's in these bills and how it's impacting us. My question is broader in that the generation, they're saying that the Democrats in the younger generations are moving away from not democracy, but the Democratic Party. And yet the Republicans seem to be holding tight. And so my question is how do we hang on if we can't get the people in to vote and make the changes that need to be made?
Yeah.
What are we going to do in the meantime?
Sure. Well, the good news is younger people absolutely agree with more progressive public policy and not conservative policy. So I think what people get upset about, rightfully so, when they see Democratic politicians not fighting back, right? Because you want to fight back. You want something to happen. And I think that's the biggest turnoff that we're seeing right now. I think when Chuck Schumer, for example, said he was going to fight like hell against something, and within 48 hours kind of rolled over and his belly was getting rubbed, that wasn't what people wanted. They wanted to see something different. And I think that's where the turnoff is with a lot of younger folks. So we just have to make sure that we're doing things like this. That's why I'm trying to convince my leadership we should be going into many more Republican districts doing this, because this allows you to be heard and give people that community around you.
I need to follow up on that.
Yeah.
Because there's an element of trust in here.
Yeah.
That, nobody trusts anybody anymore because nobody feels they're getting the truth. And with AI coming out, nobody feels they can trust anything. I don't feel I can trust anything on social media, anything on television. You always ask yourself, could this have been doctored in some way?
Yeah.
And so I have two younger kids that are in their 30s that are almost, I would say, apathetic. And so that's what I'm concerned about, is that level of apathy. how do we change that?
So we've lived through that apathy for a long time. I mean, the number one determining factor of if you're gonna vote or not is your age. So, you know, we've always had a bit of that problem in trying to get folks out to vote that we'd like to. The good news is younger voters agree with us more on the issues. The bad news is I think they're not seeing, I think, what they want to see in their elected officials. And trust me, we're all trying to deal with that. The number one problem we actually have, in my opinion, is there's no figurehead right now for the Democratic Party. You have no one-point person that says something, and it's going to happen because we don't have like a president or a vice president in that role. We have governors, you have U.S. senators, you have members of Congress, but you don't have a singular person that is that person to hold accountable, and that does make things much more difficult. So we do try to, the House Democrats work together on a lot of the messaging, work with the Senate. Sometimes they're in a little different place than we are. A lot of governors these days that you hear from are folks that want to run for president. There's probably going to be like 20 people that want to run on the Democratic side by 2028. And so it just makes it a little more difficult. And, you know, we are trying to figure out how to make sure we're doing this. But I would argue if we did 50 of these in Republican districts in a week when we're home, you'd be doing it, right? Because you get national press, you'd be in the districts doing this. This is what I'm trying to talk to my way.
Mark, I may have a way to get Derek Van Inordinate to vote against this big, beautiful bill. He is a disabled American vet, which means he's getting disability, which means he's getting care through the VA. All of that money is going to be cut if he votes for it. So if you can get to him and say, hey, look, pal, do you know you're cutting your own throat? Would that work?
No, not with Eric, unfortunately. I mean, you know, it is ironic. You had Joni Ernst, the senator from Iowa, when she had a town hall and people said people will die. And in fact, it is. I saw one estimate, 20,000 people they're estimating will die if these changes would take place in the country. And her answer was, well, we're all going to die someday. Yeah. Like, how much more obtuse can you be? The problem is, you know, Derek talks a good game. He'll never vote to cut SNAP. And this is the third time. He'll never vote to cut veterans benefits. But they fired so many people, people already are starting to see diminished care and ability to get a hold of their VA hospital. I think he said he'd never cut Medicare, and now he's voted for a $500 billion cut to Medicare. It's really holding him accountable, I think, because you're his bosses, and if he's not going to come here, if he's going to sit there and tweet from the basement of his house, then he's got to be held accountable, and I think you can still do that.
Can Trump really do that, or is the money's already been funded by Congress?
Yeah, see, so that's the problem with Doge and others. They're taking the funds we've already allocated and they're freezing it, which is the houses that we have the power of the purse. And that's part of the lawsuits that are out there, and we're winning on those lawsuits largely on that capacity. But they could pass a budget that then provides cut funding. By the way, the Center for Public Broadcasting folks that came to do Hill visits from Wisconsin went to Derek's office before my office, and Derek offers everyone who comes to his office, you get offered beer, which no other office in Congress does that, especially at 9 in the morning, but that's how he operates. He offered them beer, and then said that you've got to, how do you say it? I'm trying to get the right words. Something about what you're doing, you got to change what you're doing, you're propagandists for the left, and he slammed a door in their face. And I've never had that either happen. I've had people come by after Ron Johnson, and there's always a little bit of therapy I provide. But I've never had someone have the door slammed in their face like Derek Van Orden did to them. So, you know, your member has become unplugged this session because he's MAGA through and through, and he feels empowered. And all the more reason you don't, you know, Ron Kind was the least extreme person in Congress, right? Ron was a good person. I respected him. So that's, you know, you deserve someone like that, not someone who slams doors in faces and yells at team pages and lies about how he's going to vote. So, you got someone way up there who's been, wait, You want to just try saying it loud, and we can do this a little easier, all right?
I can project. So you bring this, I agree with you totally. You guys, what you're doing is great, thank you. Why does the Democratic leadership resist doing this? I mean, why does?
They're not resisting, there's not a resistance. I mean,
Okay, well, but they're not pushing for it. I mean,
so I think the problem is we don't have that one person that's going to call the shots, right? It does make it much harder.
well, neither did the Republicans under Obama.
I guess we do have to do the mic, I'm sorry.
Under Obama, the Republicans didn't either, and they were out there doing this stuff all the time. I mean,
Well, and right now, I guarantee this week there were probably town halls like this in at least 20 districts. At least. I want 50, okay? If you're not hearing it, that's because the media doesn't cover it, right? Sometimes, fortunately, your local media cares, so they're here today. But we don't see it. Yes.
Okay, my question is been asked probably more years than I'm alive, but I mean,
Okay.
not really, but I'm not expecting a lot for an answer because nobody's ever answered it. How do we get money, giant, big corporate money and rich dude money out of politics? Because when you look at this, even Van Orden, he's gonna quit, somebody will whip him up, put him on Fox News, pay him a big salary. We never used to have, well, I guess we've always had this somewhat of a problem. I know Citizens United didn't help, et cetera, but I hear no one, Bernie Sanders, okay, but I hear no one talking about, because both parties have a little bit, it's just the Republican Party that seems to have so much, and just look at Elon Musk for, and nobody is making any big deal about it. If we could get money out, and you wouldn't have to be on the phone every time it's your election trying to get money so you're reelected, life would be so much more pleasant.
So let me answer it in this way, because I think you are dead on. The core of almost every issue is our campaign finance system. The first bill introduced when the Democrats were in charge of the House, the last time we were in charge, 2 sessions in a row, H.R. 1, because that's, we number the bills, that's our priority bill, was the most comprehensive campaign finance, ethics, and elections reform bill ever. So it made it easier for people to be able to have the right to vote, so you couldn't have states doing things to make it harder. It tightened up some ethics laws, and it got rid of Citizens United in particular, which is one of the biggest problems, because these groups can just, outside money comes in, it's dark money, you don't know where it came from, it's got a group that's got a name that's, sounds like nothing, and all the rest. So that has been a priority. The problem is, because the Senate rules, even when we had a Democratic Senate with, Manchin and Sinema there, which, only put us at 52, the rules require 60 votes. That's why this bill, the reason this is different, this is the reconciliation bill, and I don't want to go into the weeds, but reconciliation, once a fiscal year can be used, our fiscal year is October 1st to September 30th, you can get around the 60-vote filibuster rule for something that's fiscal in nature, and that's why this is being done through reconciliation, which is why the court provisions likely won't stay. Okay, so but I agree with you. I started a podcast called With Liberty and Justice for Some, and if you get a chance, wherever podcasts are, listen to it. We've had the head of Citizens United, Tiffany Muller, on there. We've had a lot of folks talking about everything from Medicare Advantage, a lot of different subjects. SNAP, other Medicaid cuts. I asked them all, we have a 35-minute interview, and then I asked them one question that we play. I go, what's the number one issue? If you had the ability to change any one federal law, what would it be? And all these groups that work on things and put their life, into these different issues, the number one issue that they answer is campaign finance reform and Citizens United in particular. So you are right that is the core of just about everything. It is, though, the number one priority we had as House Democrats. The very first bill we introduced and passed out of the House was a bill to do that. The problem was, if you don't have 60 votes in the Senate, it became very difficult to do. So that's why we do need to build on that. When we're not right now with our backs a little against the wall on this, which is the next month or two is going to be huge, absolutely that is a very important issue. And I did not expect so many people who come in with one issue, that's what they work on, to then give the answer, campaign finance reform, as often as they did, and yet that's been the issue that's come up there.
lot of questions and a lot of details. Just a little bit of background. My name is Charles Barnard and I'm from Romney. And I have been working with friends to forecast future events for 27 years now. And we've been pretty good at it. We don't have any money. But what has struck me most over the last, 65 years, my mother started dragging me to politics stuff when I was 5. Okay. And I was reading it for it, so I understood most of it. And what bothers me the most is that there's this failure to recognize, I see, that the Republicans are what they are because they're a monolith. They have one goal, and they're all united behind it. Even if they don't agree, they will all vote the same way. Progressives are a lot like ferrets. I've had ferrets, I've had cats for 40 years, and herding ferrets and cats is difficult because they get distracted, they have other things. You come into a town hall like this and you have, if you have 200 people, you'll have 80 different single issues that they're very important about. But you don't fix single issues by working on single issues. You fix single issues by addressing structural problems. And what I see that bothers me most is that progressives do a horrible job of fighting against Republicans when they say something. Republicans are telling us right now we can't afford all these social services because they cost too much. How do they address the cost? We'll kill the programs. What's that cost? Oh, well, only a few million lives. That's not important. If you want to address things like the cost of medical care, then address the fucking cost. Address the cost of medicine. Every other country negotiates medical prices. Every other country that's developed, and many that are far less developed than we are, has full medical care. Full medical care for everybody pays over $7 per dollar spent. All of these programs that you're talking about cut, some of them pay up to $35 on the dollar you spend. If we invested our money...
Let's get to the question just for everybody. There's a lot of people that have questions, just to make sure.
Why can't you go, they tell you it costs too much, why don't you go back and say, well, here's where you can cut costs? Why don't the real liberals come back and say, hey, if we spent more, it would cost us less 5 years from now?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer it slightly different because I'm not sure I agree with your premise, but I think when people do say, why wouldn't you support cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, right? And we all, I think, support getting rid of real waste, fraud, and abuse. The Pentagon now, with this increase, will be $1 trillion a year, and they have failed the last 4 audits in a row, and in the last audit, they could only account for about a third of their equipment. We've spent billions of dollars on amphibious vehicles that only sink. The most recent class of aircraft carrier, the Ford class aircraft carrier, there's a design flaw. When the toilets clog, you have to flush $400,000 worth of acids down the toilets, literally flushing money down the toilet. So that's one area. Another one, Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage was designed to find cost savings from Medicare. First of all, Medicare is one of the most popular programs the federal government does, and that's why many of us want to extend it and have Medicare for everyone. On that alone, when you start looking at the costs, Medicare Advantage is a private insurance alternative that's supposed to save money. And in reality, it now costs more than Medicare, but also you have to get prior authorization. So if you have Medicare, you just get the health care you need. Medicare Advantage, one of the bigger callable amounts that we get are people who get turned down. Millions of people get their care turned down or slowed down. And usually at that point, if you're on Medicare Advantage, you kind of need your health care maybe a little quicker. Only 1 to 3% of the people appeal the decision, and of the appeals, 85% get overturned, which is criminal. That means only they did it for financial reasons, because there's no credibility. So we're working with a group around that. One of the bills I'm introducing is that if you have a higher than 25% overturn rate, that you no longer have the ability to offer Medicare Advantage, right? Because you're clearly not, providing the health care at that point. So there are big areas we could point to easily, and many of us have. And in the podcast, we talked about all those issues as things for that. But I think you're right, though, that we do have to not just say, I don't support what George Commission is doing because, I don't, support their cuts. I mean, their cuts have been awful. Like, they're not about waste, fraud, and abuse, and we need to point that out. So, all right. Over here. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for coming, and thank
Sure.
you for answering all of these questions.
Yeah.
Mine is very short.
Okay.
I really like your graphic. My question is, can we take a picture of that and of the empty chair and post it on social media?
Absolutely. Here, I'm going to put the empty chair right in front of it. All right. We're going to make sure. If Derek does come, is Derek here yet? No? All right. He must have got caught in traffic. It's a little hard to drive when one hand is on the Twitter wheel. We'll put that right there for you. Okay, how's that? And we'll leave it up here so you can do that. And also, we'll post on our social media this as well, because I do think it's a really great example. And again, don't forget, those main 4 benefits for us add up to about 5% of the totality of the bill. So.
You need to put a beer on the chair, not a water.
I don't know if one would be enough. All right, who's next?
Congressman, I got a mic.
Where are you? I'm sorry. Oh, there. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming up and
sure.
and taking over for the chief today. I worry about the heads of the Democratic Party these days.
I think I just want, if I can, in the beginning, because I am an official capacity, I can't really talk directly about a lot of politics. I think we've talked about that issue a few times. If you have a new one to bring up, that'd be great. But I do have to be cognizant of my role in the organization that's putting this together, because I don't want to get them in trouble.
Yes, sir, and I understand that fully. My point is that we have a tremendous source of power in popular progressive economics. We see the anti-oligarchy tours that Deputy and AOC were doing. My question is, how is the larger operation utilizing these phenomena? Are they taking this into consideration that tremendous amounts of people resonate to these messages, as opposed to the Schumercratism that we've been seeing? We're hungry for those with fire in the belly.
Yeah. And you are seeing it more, and I'll tell you, I think people are waking up to, I believe truly, I used to have bumper stickers that said, if the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow. And I believe that, and I think we're leading on this, and the leaders are catching up to where we're all at. But you are seeing people now, after in New Jersey, when they went after a member of Congress for no reason, for doing their constitutional duty of doing inspections at an ICE facility, and then to arrest that person to try to scare all of us from doing that, more people are going to ICE facilities in their states and their districts. And you're seeing this sort of thing happen. So it is happening. Right now, though, I just want to emphasize, this is the worst bill I've seen in 3 decades of public service. We have a month, maybe 2 months, to stop it, or else we're going to have friends and family members and neighbors losing their health care, losing food assistance, losing their ability to get an education. In 2 months, I'm going to talk about all kinds of things. But right now, there is one thing that we have the power when 4 members of the House Republicans stand up and say, enough, you'll stop those cuts. You happen to be in this very unique position of having a member that is in a purple district that could lose his seat if he doesn't listen to you, that you could try to influence. So I hear you, and trust me, I'd love to talk about a lot of other proactive policy. I used to be the chair of the Progressive Caucus. I got an opinion or 2 about things. But right now, stopping this is the single most important thing I think we can all do. And then at the end of the day, if they wind up passing this, make sure we're holding those accountable who voted for it. And again, you have that power to do that.
I think my
probably a little easier than that.
There we go.
But back when you talked.
Okay, let's get new people who haven't asked questions. I'm sorry, I just want to make sure
Can I just ask this? It's a real quick one. Why are the tips that are going to be, I just read that they're only going to be deductible if they're cash and not if you put it on your credit card as your payment.
I couldn't answer that, and I don't know if they even know yet, because I don't think it's been, all they've done is the fiscal side of it. I don't think there's the actual written policy on it yet, so it could just people be pontificating about it, but I don't think there's an actual directive yet on it. So people who haven't asked questions, I just want to make sure, we've got someone back here, and then maybe someone can get this gentleman a mic.
There was a proposal in this bill that was cut at the last minute to sell out federal lands. I find that extremely concerning. Do we think there's going to be more of that coming from this administration? And what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, no, absolutely, good flag. But again, I think that one for this bill could still potentially be flagged through the Senate rules. Again, the Senate rules are very obscure, but I think there's this bird rule they have about what can be in a reconciliation process. But no, absolutely. I mean, and you talk to members, especially in Nevada. If you look at Nevada, there's a lot of federal lands in Utah and places like that. And those members in particular are very, very cognizant and inform a lot of us of what's happening. But yeah, especially they're going to open up public lands to oil exploration. They're going to do a lot of things that also are very, very important. But fortunately, in this bill, they got stopped even by some of their members from having it move forward, which is exactly what I'm saying, right? In that case, they caught it before. They also had a provision to, what was the other thing? They had something else that was idiotic, and they had to take it back because enough of their members said no, but they had them voting nonstop, so they couldn't say no a lot. Now we have a little time to pause and look at it and try to make the members say no.
Real quickly, you've said what we can do is to contact our legislators with our opinions and their requests. If we do that once a week, do those subsequent duplicate requests or statements get discounted?
No, I mean, we keep track. We have people who call us daily. So don't feel bad. That's what happens. I don't blame people for wanting to be heard. Things happen daily. But thank you for saying something, because I did not just, it's not as, that's not one and done, right? I think you have to do letters to the editor. You have to do things that continue to share in your social media about what's happening, to keep putting that information out, because even though your elected official gets the message, but if they're not replying, they're not doing the right thing, you have to share that information with people, because that's how we can put pressure really on them. So it's even more than, thank you for saying it the way you did, it's more than just making that call to the office. We need to make sure others are seeing and get this information. So use your social media platforms, use letters to the editor, do all those sorts of things.
Should I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's been a drastic reduction in the VOCA funds, the Victim Crime Act funds, starting in the first term of the Trump administration. I believe that's fines and penalties against white-collar crimes, and those fees go to organizations that help people with sexual assault, victims of crime. There's been some backfill here with under the Evers administration that's helped. Is there anything in Washington, anything in the budget that's on the radar to help in that regard?
My guess is no, but the president had given us a skinny budget, and what that means is it doesn't have detail, it gives you overall target numbers. We just yesterday got the full budget, which usually, by the way, we get in March, but the first year of a president, you might get it a month late. This is at the end of May, literally we're getting it. So we're starting to mark up next week in appropriations already. We have 12 subcommittees. The budget bill, we finally just got the president's numbers, so I couldn't tell you if there's anything in there. My guess, though, is Donald Trump doing something good is less likely to happen than not on that front. When you talk regulation, I just want to share this. This is a one-off, but remember how Donald Trump started this cryptocurrency and he's cashing out on this? The reason he's able to do this is his agencies have said it's not currency, it's a collectible. And therefore it's not regulated like we regulate financial markets. So, it's like a beanie baby. But you've got these people putting these huge amounts of money, he's having them come to the White House and all the rest. So I just wanted to share that because I think, again, it shows a lot about Donald Trump. I know we're getting down to the final minutes, so I think we probably have about time for 4 more questions if we do them quickly. So I want to make sure that whoever's had a hand up gets a chance to ask. And we'll get to you, sir, I'm sure afterwards, because you had your hand up.
So I want to thank you for the hearings that you've been holding, and I'm very concerned with, and I don't listen really directly to the budget, but with RFK Jr., and especially with his responses to questions related to the lead program in Milwaukee. I don't know, it seems that if secretaries are lying before Congress, that there should be some consequences, or how are they held accountable? Because he clearly, that's just one example that comes to mind, especially since it's a Wisconsin issue, lied that the lead folks from CDC were in Milwaukee, and the director of the Milwaukee Health Department said he was misinformed, which is a very smart approach. But I'm just wondering if there were many of those kinds of comments, and I know you can only do so much, but they're basically lying to you.
Yeah. Well, the first Trump administration, he did, in many cases, pick people with expertise. This Trump administration, he required of everyone to submit video of them on TV, and he wanted loyalty. It's really the authoritarian style that he has. So we have less quality, I think, in the secretaries than we've had previously. And RFK Jr. was before my committee, also on appropriations, and I gotta tell you, it was difficult because I was trying to be nice. I really was with him, because there are some things that actually I agree with him. Getting rid of some of the carcinogenic color dyes that we're eating in candies and stuff, and one Republican on the committee was disagreeing with him on it. I said, no, get rid of carcinogenic coloring just because they can save a few pennies on something. They're doing this stuff. We got to protect people. So there's some things he's doing right. But then I asked him about immunizations, for example. And right now we have measles outbreaks, and he's immunized his children, he has said. So I thought I was giving him a softball, and I said, if you had kids now, would you immunize them against measles? And he said, well, probably, but maybe I shouldn't be giving advice. If I say, people will take it. He oversees the CDC that gives advice on vaccines. But so then I tried chickenpox, and then he had an answer. And then I thought polio. It's got to be safe. I'm not going to COVID. I'm not going to the flu. I'm going polio. And we still got that he couldn't give advice, right? So it's not so much it's a lie. It's just incompetence, right? That we're getting out of them. And Secretary Besant, who's a very smart guy, head of the Treasury, which is why I think I got angry with him, because I expect more than I expected from RFK Jr., bluntly. When I said, who pays tariffs, instead of being honest and saying, well, it's the importer, and it gets passed on to consumers, which is exactly the easy answer that's there, he tried to evade it and not answer it. So he didn't outright lie, but it was more an evasion of what he did. But the best way is, again, public accountability. When they do something that looks so bad, that's when the pressure happens. We can do something with that. But no, it is interesting because we've had all the secretaries, probes come before if you have the relevant subject matter for your subcommittees, and there was a lot of non-answers given. I think that's really the biggest problem.
My leg fell asleep.
Yeah, sorry. I know you were trying. That's why I was getting to you.
I would like to thank the local representatives for being here.
Absolutely.
Especially want to thank you and just indicate you are a representative of we the people.
Yeah.
I have thousands of questions. I'll just ask one. You talked about having our voices heard. Emails, phone calls, letters to the other social media. What is the most effective one single way to contact a representative? But before you answer, can I just indicate relative to our voices being heard, we have a weekly protest here in Eau Claire, downtown at the Federal Building every Wednesday. This past Wednesday was our 12th week. It's from 4 to 5:30 downtown at the Federal Building. You can have your voice heard there.
Sure. No, thank you for sharing that as well. Look, I think the best thing, and it's harder with congressional district, but he still has to come to Eau Claire, the biggest city in his district, is face-to-face, right? When you are looking me in the eye and we're actually having a conversation, that is by far the best. Short of that would be having public town halls and things. I don't think your member is going to do that. A personal written letter would probably be next because it's got a personal story to it. Or email is the same difference, by the way, especially for a federal representative. They screen our if you send me a letter via mail, I might not get it for 3 weeks because they still screen everything for toxins and stuff. So email that letter, but an individualized letter, not a mass email.
Right.
Then after that, a phone call, because if you tell, you're talking to someone, they're writing it down, we're recording it, and if you have something unique, we have had people that have told us stuff we have no way to find out all the cuts that Trump is doing until someone lets us know. So by you doing that phone call, that's information that's unique. The least effective, but often used, are things like postcard campaigns or a generic email that it's the same from everyone, because I know the effort that went into it, right? So
Right.
I'll see there's 80 people, but honestly, one well-written letter telling an incredible story is far better than 80 postcards or 80 generic emails that come out. But it's a really good question. The other thing I like to offer is if your elected official does this while you're talking, do you know what that means?
I'm not listening.
That means they have the muscles in the back of their neck that allow their head to bob. That does not mean yes, right? Yes is yes, no is no. Get that answer out of them, especially someone like Derek. Because I do believe, I'll give him a little bit of leniency. Sometimes I just think he doesn't understand, because, so you may have to ask it a couple times, because I think sometimes he does believe some of the things he says. And even though they're not factual and no one else may believe those, I think that's why sometimes you have to ask it a couple different times. So.
She's been waiting.
Okay, sure. Here we'll get. And then I think we're going to probably wrap up after these two. And I do apologize, but it's been a long time for everybody, and I appreciate you coming out today. Yes.
Kind of going off of what he said, a lot of the groups in the area have been, nationally have been talking about the fivecalls.org.
Yes.
Is that effective?
Yes, because it helps. It makes it easier for you to contact reps and do things. So yes, I would say use that. Still for volume, it depends where your time is. I mean, the one gentleman earlier asked about effort. I don't think there's a lot of effort to put a call in or write an email, because you can send it to multiple people, the same one, right? It's a unique story you're telling, but you can send it to 2 senators and your member of Congress, and with a hit, and then it's out there. So I would use that. Great. Yep. And the last question, you got all the pressure on you, all right?
Yikes. Just to ask, thank you for being here, and to ask for a suggestion. You mentioned USAID, and I'm reading and hearing farmers being interviewed, and they will admit they voted for Trump, and they're being hurt badly by the cuts in USAID. And manufacturers, by the tariffs, owners will say, I voted for Trump, and my business is hurt badly, and they have buyer's remorse. This bill will hurt all of us, not just if we're on Medicaid or Medicare, because it will greatly affect the healthcare system adversely. And, schools are being affected adversely. Do you have suggestions not just to contact our elected officials, but to talk to people we know who have been outspokenly pro-Trump and now are thinking, wow, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah. And have them write a letter to the editor. Have them post on their social media, amplify that post, because you're right. In fact, I'm going to say something depressing, and then I'll say something to bring it back up. But Jody and Christian were still with me at the very end of because you had to go somewhere, Jeff, at the end of that town hall in Chippewa Falls. Farmers Union, 75 farmers for an hour and a half, told Christian, Jody, and I about funds that were being frozen and cut, that when Trump was saying none of them were. We were hearing about tariff issues, all this sort of stuff. At the very end, it might have been the most significant thing, I think, or one of the most significant things that happened. The gentleman from Farmers Union stood up and said, I just want everyone to know, many of you work with this gentleman at an agency. I'm trying to be polite, so the way I say it. And we just want to let you know, a week ago, he found out from Elon Musk that his job was taken, and last night, or that night, he went home and took his life. And that's the real life ramifications of this. And at a town hall in another county, family members of his came up to me. I don't think I had a chance to share this. And I found out a little more of the story. He was someone who had signed many of those IRA contracts, and farmers had taken out loans with a promise from the government they were going to get the money, and then they weren't getting the money, and they were facing all kinds of financial problems, and the stress of that along with the other. That's the real life ramifications of all this stuff. It's not just that Elon Musk can put another rocket ship in the sky, or Donald Trump can get another gold-plated whatever to put in his house. It's that real people are being impacted. So you being here on a beautiful Saturday morning may question, you should be outside, it's really beautiful out, but thank you for being here. I may have to question that. But this is really important that we're getting the word out, that we're supporting the groups doing the litigation, because that's stopping the bad things from happening right now. Getting the communication out is making sure that people will then say, hey, I know that person, they're a good person, and look, they're losing their health care, right? It's not what they're being told by their government, but it's real life stories that need to get told that'll matter. And then just remember, next year you have the ultimate power, and you can hire or fire people who are representing you. And if they're not doing their job, and they're not doing it now, they're not doing it in 2 months, and they're not doing it next year, you have a really unique power. And I'll tell you, based on that April election, I think a lot of people are going to be going into retirement after next year. So, thank you for coming out again. It is a beautiful morning. I appreciate you being here. Again, thanks again to Jeff Smith, Jody Emerson, Christian Phelps for being with us as well. And for being local governmental leader who's here as well too. They're all doing really good work. I really appreciate it. Thank you.